Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason, and welcome to another episode, a very special one of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers to be celebrated. With me right now, I have a woman. If you looked at the I network or various TV markets ranging from Reno, Birmingham, Big D, and Dallas, we're going to get into behind the hard copy. It's going to be in a current affair. It's going to be as saucy as a Jerry Springer episode, RIP. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big thank you, a round of applause for having Miss Rene Syler on Beyond the Album Cover. Miss Syler, welcome.
Hi, Jarrell. Wow. So you brought out hard copy and a current affair.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only 39, but I remember those shows vividly. Hard
Mhm.
copy, current affair, inside the edition. Before Maury went, Are You My Baby Daddy?
Yeah.
And remember the days of when you had the big three on your major news network. That
Mhm.
was the late Peter Jennings on
Mm,
ABC,
mm.
Dan Rather, CBS, and Tom Brokaw on NBC. But my family, we were loyal to Peter Jennings over on ABC.
Yep, yep, yep. I remember watching Peter Jennings. Yeah, I remember back in the day when we had three, or back in the Sacramento market, we had an independent station, which then became Fox. So I'm old enough to remember when Fox was only programming like 2 or 3 nights a week. And now it's a full-fledged network. So
Right,
yeah.
yeah, because with Fox, this was around 86 when Rupert Murdoch
Mhm.
from
Yep.
Australia came, brought up all of these channels from Metro Media, converted them over to Fox stations. And Fox still have that independent TV spirit where we're only going to program but so much and leave it to the affiliates to fill in the scheduling for the rest. And Fox, pretty much the house the Simpsons built,
Mhm.
and I felt they could have and should have syndicated Arsenio because when
Mhm.
we think about Arsenio and what he meant to the culture and to
Mhm.
TV, he was given the seasoning for late night that necessarily wasn't there until mainstream hosts like Carson and later on started say, urban acts are in, let's book them.
Yeah. 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 Wow, what year would that have been? Arsenio. You're good with numbers
I
and
think
facts, so
like
I'm sure.
88, I want to
Yeah.
say, because this was right after Fox had canceled Joan Rivers' show, and then
Oh,
he had him fill in for her, and then I think that's what kind of led to having the syndicated late night show.
wow. Yeah. Arsenio was, you're right, but people, we they call it broadcasting for a reason, because we're trying to cast the biggest net, right? The broadest net. And back in that time, back in the 80s, like you and I were just saying, there were like 3 or 4 television stations per market. When I refer to market, I'm talking about area of dominant influence. So you would have like the San Francisco market that would cover San Francisco, Oakland, the Bay Area, and all of the surrounding areas in the Bay Area. I grew up in Sacramento, which would take care of the surrounding areas in Sacramento. They were two separate markets, but there was a there was more of a painting everything with a broad brush. And Arsenio, who though was important to our culture, the question would be, does the rest of the audience really matter, or are they interested? And so they would do research. Now, shoot, you ask your tribe or your network when you have a question. But back then, they actually spent a lot of money in these research firms and doing all this research. And so if the audience was late night and primarily, I don't know, white women, which I doubt it was, but they might not be as interested in Arsenio. So maybe that was what was behind why it never got syndicated, and why he never became like a Johnny Carson or what have you.
Right, and it also brought to mind for me Soul Train, what Don Cornelius did with taking a show that was regional based out of Chicago, based out of, I believe, Hot Red and Blue. I think the
Mm,
station was WCIU. He originally was
wow.
a police officer, but got pulled over by Roy Wood Sr., who was the father of comedian Roy Wood Jr., told him, like, hey, you got a voice for radio. And Don Kniggs went and started his career at
No
WVON,
way.
voice of the Negro in Chicago. And then that later led to Soul Train, the Chicago version. And then he moved west to LA so that way, labels are set up in LA. Let me go ahead,
Yeah.
get everybody there, and start something special. And then, of course, 2 years prior to that, out in the tri-state area, you had the Soul hosted by Ellis Hayslip, which was kind of
Wow.
almost like precursor to what Don was doing with Soul Train. Both of them had the ideas of we're gonna put unadulterated, unfiltered black culture on TV,
Wow.
live, and in living color.
You know what? You're like a walking encyclopedia because I did not know that story about Don Cornelius, and he totally had a voice that was cut for radio and television. You know, the thing about back in those days was that those things needed to be greenlit or okayed by a station manager or a group or whoever was taking care of the syndication or what have you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, it was the King brothers, King World, behind Oprah and all that. And now the gatekeepers are literally gone. You and I are sitting here having a great conversation that you'll put up on your YouTube channel and it'll live in perpetuity. And people will see this for, however long versus like the 3 minutes or whatever that you would have or 5 minutes on a television news segment. So the way we consume media and the way we produce it is so so different and I'm actually really here for it.
Yeah, it definitely cuts the middleman out. You could
Mm,
go direct to consumer, almost like back
yeah.
in the day before rap
Yes.
labels started getting on majors, where they would just pop out the trunk. When I think of that, I think of artists from the Bay Area like
Yeah.
Hammer, Too Short, E40. They would just go gold and platinum in their own area, and I necessarily don't have to cater to a
Right.
mainstream audience. I could just be fine right where I'm at.
And so I had just mentioned about broadcasting that is really about seeking kind of the lowest common denominator. And by that, I'm talking about what do the most people have in common.
Mhm.
Whereas what you're talking about, what we're doing, where media is going, is really about really digging into your tribe, really digging into your niche, finding people, producing content for those people, and forget about everybody else. We're not really interested in making sure that we are all things to all people. We try to be all things to some people.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you went to school at Sac State, got a degree in psychology, cut your teeth in the Reno market. What was it like for you jumping from Reno to Birmingham, then to the Big D of Dallas, first going on FAA, the Spirit of Texas on 8. Shout out to Dale Hansen.
Wow, you are like a walking encyclopedia. So back in the day, so I had gone to Sac State. I had secured my degree in psychology. I thought I was going to be a psychologist, and realized that I didn't want to go to school that long. I didn't want to be in school forever. So now I'm, in this sort of dilemma, like, what do I do? I have this bright, shiny degree, but I don't know what to do with it. And I was reading a newspaper and reading about Liz Walker, who at the time, this would have been around 82-ish, was the highest paid Black anchor woman in the country. And she was the reason it had made local news in Sacramento is because she was unmarried and pregnant. And the NAACP was saying what a bad example she was as a pregnant Black single mother, except she was different. She wasn't like, a young woman, just out of college or out of high school getting pregnant. And this was somebody who was like 35 years old and making $500,000 a year. There was no question that she would have been able to take care of a child. And this was a decision that she wanted to make. In that moment, though, in reading about her, I thought, you know what? Maybe I want to be in television. Maybe I think I do. So I ended up making a few phone calls, got an African American woman who was doing the weather at Channel 13 at the time, got her on the phone, And she literally walked me through step by step what I needed to do and how to get on TV, even with my degree in psychology. Because back then I was like, do I need to go back to school? Do I need a degree? So on and so forth. She told me exactly what to do. I got a couple of internships, and one of those was an internship at Channel 40, which was the Fox affiliate back then. And this is how long ago that was. Fox was only programming like 3 nights a week. Um, but it was an internship in the production department, but I was able to hang out in the newsroom when I wasn't doing the production duties. And so I would rip wire copy, rewrite stories, all of that, the stuff that, really the grunt work of television news, but important work, by the way. And then from there, I cut a resume tape and I got my first job in Reno, Nevada, which was at the CBS affiliate, KTVN, back then in like 1989. And I worked at two stations in Reno. I worked at the CBS affiliate, and then I left and went over to the ABC affiliate. And from there, I went to so at the CBS affiliate, I was a reporter, and I went to the ABC affiliate as a reporter weekend anchor. And so that was where I really started cutting my anchor teeth, was at KOLO in Reno. And then from there, I went to Birmingham, Dallas, the network. The rest is history.
So what was that transition like for you coming from being out west, going down south to Texas, well, Alabama, then
Yeah.
Texas, and
Yeah.
knowing that culturally it's different?
Yeah. Yeah. It really was a bit of a culture shock. But looking back on it now, you know how when you're growing up in a situation, you don't realize what it is until you're out of that. And then you look back on it and you're like, oh wow, like I'm really starting. So I've really kind of done a deep dive myself on what it was like growing up in Sacramento or in the suburbs of Sacramento back in the 80s and late 70s. But it was a big culture shock to go from Sacramento, which was, even though it's part of California, it was a conservative part of California, to Birmingham. And I was the weekend anchor in Birmingham, and then I went on to Texas, to Dallas. So the big thing for someone like me, and now it's not such a big deal, but back then it was to not develop a regional dialect, right? You didn't want to, because I didn't know where I was going to end up. Where was I going to put down roots? Was it going to be in the north? Was it going to be in the west? Where was it going to be? And I didn't want to sound like I was from anywhere specifically. So that was sort of a big thing of mine, was like, how do I keep from developing a regional dialect?
Right. Appeal to be broad because we all know
It's,
the stories with, especially African American anchors, back in the day when the Afro was in, a lot of station managers like, no, 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 you're not gonna wear that. You doggone sure ain't gonna put up no fists on my TV show network because we want to appeal to Jimmy, Becky, Sue, and some affluent part of town, and
yep,
you are not gonna
yep,
have our ad rates go down,
yep,
Miss Anchor Woman,
yeah,
because you're not going to be tired. You're not going to
yeah.
be mad as heck, and you're not going to take it anymore. That's a
Yeah.
network reference for those of you that don't know.
Yeah,
Look it up.
exactly. Oh my gosh, Darrell, stop it. Yes. Isn't it funny though how I feel like that movie, we're talking about the movie Network, was so prescient back then. And the stuff that the anchor man who goes crazy and starts developing his own following, and Sybil the soothsayer, and you guys who are watching this, please look up the show, because the movie, because it's crazy. But it was very forward looking. It looked at a lot of, and I think, really what we've seen in like the collapse of MSNBC and the numbers there, the collapse of CNN, and really what's going on with cable in general, and where are people getting their news, and why do they continue to watch, and what are they, there's a there's a lot to study with regard to what is happening with media today.
Yeah, and we have Ronnie to thank for that because in 1987 he repealed a little thing called the Fairness Doctrine, where you would
Mm,
have both sides come on your platform to give their equal view. But when that got erased, that's
Mm.
where we get things to the left, things to the right that supposedly is fair and balanced. You know which
Yeah.
network I'm talking about.
Yeah, so and that was, did that just cover broadcast though and not cable, or was cable also subjected to the
Um,
FCC guidelines
I'm,
regarding fair and balance?
I'm not too sure, but I know
Yeah, me
that for
neither.
sure applied to network because
Mhm.
you know when you're on a network,
Yes.
you are a part of the audience, the people's trust.
Yeah.
And it's in good practice, just like when you used to have that little seal when TV used to sign off. They don't do that
Yep.
no more. But you definitely want to be a part of good practice. And it was good practice to make sure you had both sides come and explain. But now is where I'm just gonna appeal to my demo.
Yeah.
And if my demo is liking what I'm feeling,
Mm.
then that's all I need to go with. And we saw that about a month ago, and you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. You know, one of the things that I believe is a bit disconcerting, and we've seen this happen over the last, whatever, 20, 30, 40 years, is the consolidation of media behind these big conglomerates, right? So Sinclair Broadcasting, let's use them as an example. Sinclair owns, I don't know, it's a big television station group that owns, however many television stations. I can't think of off the top of my head, but it reaches a large portion of the country, right? A large, so whatever, maybe it's 30%, there's, in other words, there are stations in Norfolk, there are stations in San Francisco, in New York, in maybe not New York, but that are owned by one single television group. So you've got the big players like Sinclair and Tegna and who else? I can't think of it.
Next
But
star.
Nexstar is another one. But they are, because they are owning so much, they can actually also program their own messaging. Now, when I say program their own messaging, I mean, I think that we sort of look at TV news and we're like, we want to believe that it's journalism with a capital J, but you still are trying to toe the line with regard to how your employer, you don't want to get fired. So you're not going to do anything crazy. You're going to stay in line with your employer's sort of bent. And I think that that becomes dangerous, as I said, when you start seeing the consolidation, and then these independent stations are just disappearing. They can't play. They can't. And that all happened when, they started buying syndicated programming. And, a mom and pop TV station can't buy Oprah Winfrey, which was a big player back in the day, can't buy that can't pony up that money to have that syndicated programming run on their network. They just don't have the cash. So those things go to big groups like, Tegna, Nexstar, et cetera. So
Yeah,
yeah, the consolidation piece is really, really concerning.
yeah, and that all kind of started with the Telecommunications Act of '96, which
Mm.
eliminated all those rules. Say, hey, you can only own so many stations in the
Yeah.
market, where it's
Yep.
almost like Pac-Man, where you're gobbling up everything
Yep.
and you're just pushing all of the mom and pop stations out. And
Mhm.
you mentioned how mom and pop stations can't afford
No.
Oprah, the syndication package, because the magic number to get in
Mhm.
syndication, I believe, is 100. Hit that magic 100, and
Mhm.
then you could be in syndication with Oprah. She started off her career in news in
Yeah.
Baltimore. I think that was where
Yeah.
her and Gail met. And
Mhm.
then she ended up making her way to the Chicago market,
Yep.
doing AM Chicago. And I believe it was the late Ebert that told Oprah syndication is key. So what did they
Wow.
do? They rebranded AM Chicago, flipped it to the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Right. Right. And so while you and I are taking this trip down memory lane, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So the things that were so great about Oprah are, that she was like so relatable. Even white, housewives in Minnesota were able to relate to Oprah. And that was part of her power, was like, just, she was always asking the question that people in the audience wanted to know. And she was always just really relatable. Now, while we're operating on smaller scales, the issue still really is relatability. The people who watch your podcast watch it because they relate to you. They love the information that you're giving. They are hard and fast viewers. They comment, they do whatever, right?
Mhm.
That same thing is what was important in television. But you see, they are the same kind of tools. They're just in different delivery systems.
Right, different delivery systems. And I want to mention we had lost this year of Donahue. I want to talk about the importance of Donahue and what he
Mhm.
meant to the TV landscape.
Mm. Yeah, wow. So Phil Donahue, wow, when was he, you probably know this more than I do. When did he sort of burst onto the national scene? Would that have been like in the mid 80s? Like, because he was the beginning of the rise of the talk shows, right? So it was
Mhm.
him, and then we had Jenny Jones and Sally Jesse Raphael and boy,
Gerardo.
who Geraldo, exactly. So Phil was like the granddaddy, right? And
Mhm.
and then it took a turn. It took a real weird turn when then it became shock television. And all of these things were happening because why? They wanted eyeballs. What are people watching? So Phil Donahue may have, I can't remember what his content was like in the beginning, but maybe it was a little staid and maybe very, quiet and calm. But then the audience is like, yeah, I'm not really getting anything from this. I really want to see people beating each other up. Maury comes in, and that's what you see. And even though the content was so, you felt some kind of way after watching it, but
Mhm.
people watched it. People
Yeah.
watch it. It's the same way. I'm not sure if you remember this, but years ago, WBBM in Chicago, Channel 2, decided that they didn't want to cover car chases anymore. They felt like it was a disadvantage to their viewers. They just, they weren't going to put the chopper up to cover car chases. And they tried to take this sort of highbrowed idea and sensibility about local television. And it was an unmitigated disaster because it turns out that people actually wanted to see the car chases. So yeah, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and with Donahue, I believe the show before it went national was based out of either Dayton or Columbus. But Donahue, he
Uh,
was really a true proponent for hip hop because he had UTFO on his show breakdancing. And then he later on went and had Uncle Luke in the Two Live Crew
I
on
think I remember
Donahue
that. Yeah.
back when Uncle Luke went to Supreme Court to fight for you to be nasty as you want to be on your records. And we got the parental
Wow.
advisory stickers on those labels. And we were
Wow.
talking about how the superstations had a huge reach because they took advantage of what was the new frontier at the time, which was
Mm,
satellite and
mm.
cable TV with the superstation TBS out of Atlanta, KTLA out of LA, and just
WGN.
how
Yep.
WGN out of Chicago. That's how I got to be a Bulls fan. Thank you very much, WGN. Well, RIP because it's now News Nation. And just how you were able to see what was going on in a
Yep.
market that was different from you. And it made you feel like, hey, I belong in the Chicagoland
Right.
market. I feel like I could easily go and be on Bozo's grand prize game and try to win a trip to Disneyland. And can we just talk about how they had the foresight to know we are going to expand our reach,
Hmm.
but at the same time, cater to a people that likes this thing
Hmm.
all the time. And that's how we got BET back in 1980, which was originally, those that don't know, BT was originally like Nickelodeon Nick at Night, how they would split the channels during a certain
Ah,
time.
uh-huh.
Originally, BT, it shared time on USA. Well, originally, USA was the Madison Square Garden Network. Then they changed the
Wow.
name to USA. BT split time with USA in the beginning. And then I think maybe
Wow.
2 or 3 years later became its own channel and Black Star Power. still strong, still standing to this day. And then MTV,
Oh yeah.
it
Oh
was
God.
originally now or MTV originally it was put together by Warner Amex, a combination of Warner Communications and American Express, 1981. But I believe 2 years prior, in '79, in the Columbus market, there was a little test device called Cube, which was the first on-demand cable network thing, but they didn't have a name for it, where you had a box and a remote, and they would have like little interactive games that you could play and everything like that. And then there was this little channel for kids called Pinwheel that debuted on Cube, and then it later flipped and rebranded to Nickelodeon.
Oh my. What year was that?
I believe it was like 78, 79, but the Cube was only available in the Columbus, Ohio market because it was like a test market for Cube. They
Wow.
were trying to do a national distribution, but I guess it was just too ahead of the curve.
Listening to you talk for I keep saying your knowledge is encyclopedic, honestly, but um it just reminds me of like the people who have the foresight to be making moves like you said, the cube was just a tiny bit ahead of its time. It just was. If it had been a few years later, it might have been a whole different story. But I'm really fascinated to have watched in my career and lifetime, to have watched us go from when TV stations used to sign off at midnight with the national anthem, to now a 24-hour on demand, wherever you are, whenever you are. You wake up in the middle of the night, you pick up your phone and you can see anything. You could see and find anything. And so when you think about that, that is like,
Mind
mind
blowing.
blowing.
Mind
Yeah.
blowing. Yeah. So I want to transition to, how did you jump from Dallas to go to the Big Eye Network? Was it where somebody from New York was watching you in Dallas, say, let's
Yeah.
put her on national TV and see how she does?
So my story there is that I had been a local news anchor for, I don't know, however, like probably, I guess at that point, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years. And so I had gone, from Reno to Birmingham to Dallas. And I was in Dallas, two television stations, Channel 8 WFAA, and then Channel 11 KTVT. And at the time, I had my life was great. I had just literally, I had two young children. I had just built a house. I mean, there was like everything was all laid out. Had the perfect schedule. I was the noon and 5 o'clock anchor. So I would come in at 10, do the noon news, have the whole afternoon to do some cut-ins or whatever, and then do the early evening broadcast, and then I was home. So I could get my kids to school, and then I could, have dinner with them that night. Then my agent, at the time, William Morris Agency, called me and said, "Listen, Channel CBS is rebranding its morning show again, because as you know, it's had trouble finding its footing in national news, morning news." So he said, "I think you should apply. I want to send them a tape of you." And I was like, Henry, his name was Henry Reich. I was like, I just built a house. I'm happy. I don't want to do this. He said, "Oh, Rene, let me send him a tape. Nothing's going to happen from it probably. So don't even worry about it." Except that something actually did happen from it. I ended up getting the job, which was insanity. So I get hired as one of the four co-hosts of the early show on CBS. CBS was an interesting animal back in the day, and I don't know if they still do it. I don't think they do, but because they were really kind of having trouble finding their footing in the morning, their affiliates were not happy with the numbers. And so CBS at the time had said, "Look, we're going to let you guys program. We'll do this hybrid model. So you can program your mornings." So their local mornings would go up against the Today Show and Good Morning America. And then they would do these cut-ins for the network, which would be then we would come in and take over. Well, we couldn't get any traction that way. And it just was a really difficult situation. They ultimately rescinded that. They took the 2 hours back. So all the morning shows would go head to head 7 to 9. Um, in the first year that I was there, I commuted back and forth to Texas. I don't know if a lot of people, I think I've talked about it, so I don't think it's a secret, but I left my family in Texas, and I was on an airplane every Sunday afternoon and every Friday afternoon. And then I would spend the week during the week in New York. And I did that for about a year. And then I moved my family up to New York. So yeah, it was a little bit chaotic getting up there. And it was also the thing, Jarrell, was like I had worked my way up from local news, the affiliate in Reno, where we had to write, and I didn't have to shoot, but I did have to write everything. I had to edit my own video, to all of a sudden the network where you have so many people out there helping you. And I was like, this isn't this crazy? It's almost like it's backward, because by the time I reached the network, I knew a lot. I knew how to do a lot. Where I needed the help was when I was back at local, just getting started.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost like for morning TV, or for my European folks, it's called breakfast TV. That it is the staple of
Yeah.
American morning TV today. Good Morning America, the current CBS morning show. And little fun fact about today: today was created by Pat Weaver,
Mm.
and his daughter became Ripley,
Ripley from,
Sigourney Weaver.
oh, that Ripley. Oh my gosh. I did not know that. Wow. Ah,
The more you know,
you got all the facts.
the more you know. Shout out to NBC. But how different is it morning TV going to when you were doing local and you got the resources and you got the pedigree of saying, "Hey, I work for CBS," and you could
Yeah.
pretty much have comp block to any place you want, get access to anybody who you want to interview
Yeah.
just off of those three letters.
And I was never, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. I was never one of those people or TV talent that was, oh, do you know who I am? That was never really my thing. I went into television for a couple of reasons. One, I was it really took advantage of my skill set, which was communication, reading, writing, disseminating information. So television was perfect for me then. I was less into the all of the other accoutrements that come with TV, like getting great tickets to an event or something like that. Um, but it was the network, between the network and locals. It was like such a it was like having to do everything on a shoestring, and then having an open checkbook back in that day. It's
Mhm.
not like that now, because everybody's watching pennies. But it made it easier to do the job. We had more access because we had larger reach. People would want to come do our shows because we would have more viewers. So yeah, that was kind of one of the big differences. Yeah.
Right. And kind of backtracking a little bit to when we were talking about Soul Train and Soul, I'm sure you may or may not know there's a little station out in the Oakland area called Soul Beat, which pretty much Oakland's version of BT. They pretty much supported, all things black, all things Oakland, and I mentioned earlier, of course, Too Short, MC Hammer, E40, and it was like with the rise of hip hop at that time when it was starting to permeate in the suburbs and making its way out of the ghettos, as they would say. And I want to talk about the influence of hip hop
Mhm.
in news, and we can't mention that without mentioning the late great Stuart Scott, who
Mm.
got his start working at WRAL. He went
Mm.
to
Oh, I
North
didn't know that.
Carolina Tar Heel, and
Oh,
how when he first got to Bristol, he was adding in flavor and funk to a
Mhm.
stale bred sports center that really
Mhm.
wasn't giving you what I want in sports, which is like I want somebody that talks like me,
Yep.
looks like me, that
Mhm.
is me, and he pretty much paved the way for what we see at ESPN and other networks with
Yeah.
Stephen A. and Jamel Hill, who was on there, Michael Smith, and pretty much
Mhm.
everybody that came through that network, pretty much followed the path that Stuart Scott laid.
Wow. Again, your knowledge is crazy, but yeah, so this was um and is a little bit, I think, let me go back. I think what people need to remember is that this is about money. It always has been about money. Back in the day when I first got in TV, money, I mean, television was like you basically had a license to print money, right? It's not like that now because the pie is cut so many different ways in people's audience and attention span is so fragmented. But somebody, and one other thing, we cannot forget that a lot of these stations, the people and the decision makers were white. So they're not really listening to Stuart Scott or Stephen A or anything like that because they couldn't see, was it a crime of commission or a crime of omission? Did they just not see? Were they not looking at their audience? I think probably what happened, and I may have to go and do some research on this, but I think in the quest for more viewers, they said we've got to look outside of our usual. Like, what else? Who else is out there? Who's watching? What are they watching? Who's available to watch? So let's try something new and something different. And I think that that's how they start looking at how do we become more representative of our communities.
Right.
And even now, I feel like we're still not really we're better. Some places are better than others, but even now we're not as great as we should be and could be.
Right. And it kind of brings back to my mind the fight that Michael Jackson had when trying to break through on MTV, because when
Mm,
MTV first debuted in '81, there was nobody of this on that network unless
mhm.
you played music that was safe, that appealed
Yeah,
to middle America.
yeah,
And Walter Yetnikoff forced MTV's hand by calling them and saying, look, you're going to play him. I'm going to yank the whole library off of rotation. Rick
yep,
James was already sounding the horn about it because they weren't playing Rick James
right.
on the top power day part right next to the Police or Simple Minds or whatever
Billy
other
Idol.
hot that was at the time, Billy Idol. So when Michael Jackson broke through and when Thriller became the biggest selling album of all time, and he used the visual medium of video, which was the
Mm,
social media of his day, to
mm,
pretty much force MTV's hand and say, look, you're going to respect me, you're going to play me, I'm going to appeal to middle America. I'm not a white artist. I'm not a black artist. I'm just an artist, period. And
right.
then there's an infamous interview that David Bowie did, RIP, where he grilled Mark Goodman about how come you're not playing enough black artists.
Yep.
And, I had the chance to interview T.C. Tompkins, who was a former record man over at Epic when Sade was coming over to the States, and how, of course, over in Europe, radio formats are more free flowing, free form.
Oh,
Whereas over here, it's segregated and it's based on a little R word, racism, been around 400 plus years.
yep. Isn't that the truth? But what's so great about it now is that it takes time, but if you're a great art, you as an artist can now get right to your viewer. You don't have to knock on the door at MTV to try to get let in. Now it's actually inverted. You just do your own thing. You communicate. You do your whatever it is. You make your music. You do your art, and then you put it out there on this World Wide Web, and people find you. So that's what, like, I'm sitting here talking to you, and this is really exciting to me to talk to you because I love that you have taken your skill set and are using it in a different way, the skill set is still the same, but you're just using it in a different way and building your own tribe. And that's what I'm doing now as well. So um, I've been in television news for like 30 years, but the other day I was like, well, I say the other day, to me, this is what old people do. We always say the other day, and we really mean like a decade ago. But anyway, I had been thinking for the last 10 years about how do I teach people the skills that I have picked up over the last 3 decades. What do I do? And so I ended up putting together a website. I ended up putting a course together. So the course is, I'm dropping the course early next year. That'd be early 2025. But basically, it's called Pitch, Practice, Perform. And it's teaching people everything they need to know, from the pitching of a story and who to pitch, to the practicing of it, to the actual production and actually what it's like to be in the studio. So I'm taking them through the life cycle of, if you wanted to get on TV, here's how you would do it. I am doing that myself. I created the entire curriculum. I shot the tape right here in this location. I bought a teleprompter off of Amazon. I wrote the script. You see what I'm saying? There was nobody. It is truly a one-man band. And I did it because I know that there's an audience for that. And so it's mind-blowing when I think about it too much, like where I came from and all the skills that I acquired over the last 30 years, and what's happened to television in that time, and how I'm utilizing it now, just the way you are. So I love it.
It almost kind of brings back to the era of wrestling where you had the regional territories, and it kind of feels like media is in the regional territory space
Mm,
where you're going to cater to your demo, to your market. You
yeah.
necessarily don't need to go to a big box brand to really expand your
Mm-mm.
name. And to take from the old Field of Dreams philosophy, if you build it, they will
Yes.
come. You got to be consistent though, because with the
Yep.
bar of entry being so low, it's almost where you got to constantly crank, constantly pump out content, which for me kind of worries to where we won't have anybody that's here for the long run, where it's
Right.
all about clicks, likes, impressions, and for the moment. Are we going to have a Walter Cronkite? Are we going
Mm,
to have a Connie Chung, a Dan Rather, a
mm.
Peter Jennings, a Sam Donaldson, a Cokie
Never again.
Roberts, a
Mm-mm.
George Stephanopoulos, a Harry Smith,
No,
a Paula
no,
Zahn, a Jane
right.
Pauley, a Brian Gumble.
Because the no is the answer, because of the hyper fragmentation of news and information. So no, the people that you listed, those were all big network names. And that was so again, the network was about and is about casting the largest net you can and trying to get as many people as you can. And that just doesn't work anymore. The regional model works for like what you just said about wrestling, because how could someone in New York know the sense and sensibilities of Greenville, South Carolina? Right. So there are intricacies and elements in that, in parts and in communities, that the network could never ever possibly know. Even if they sent somebody down there and said spend a week here, you're still not embedded in the community. You still don't know, which is why I wonder what happened to what was it? AOL had done a thing where they were starting to do this hyper local news and information. It wasn't a broadcast, but it was a website. I can't think of it now. Somebody will write it in the comments and then call me a stupid idiot. But it was something like that. But I think they were just a tad bit ahead of their time, because I lived in New York, right? While I was working in New York, but I didn't live in New York City. I didn't live in Manhattan. I lived in Chappaqua, New York. So are the things that are happening in, say, I don't know, Harlem or in Manhattan, Midtown, do those things matter to me? No. What really matters to me is what's happening in my neighborhood. So we've seen like we were talking about earlier about this, the dance shows and Don Cornelius and all that, that started with a small regional audience, then went big, but now we are now moving again to this smaller, more engaged local thing again.
Right. Going back to live and local, because on the radio
Yeah.
side,
Yes.
voice tracking or VTing is pretty much killing the industry where you're going to have a jock in any town,
Yeah.
USA, record day parts for, let's say, Dallas, Texas. But
Mhm.
they live in, let's say, Miami. But the
Yep.
feel is to get live and local
Yeah.
loosely to make it feel like you're in that market because most stations do not want to hire the talent because it
Yeah.
costs money or they don't have the money to attract talent. So
Mhm.
what do? Okay, we're gonna buy Elvis Duran, we're gonna
Yeah.
buy Ricky Smiley, we're gonna buy Ryan Seacrest, we're gonna put it on morning, on
Yep.
evenings, put it on afternoon drive, maybe have somebody local do overnights or swing,
Yep.
but it's all about mass concentration and saving that
Yeah.
bottom dollar.
It's the consolidation. And again, the consolidation piece is what is really the most troubling to me, is the consolidation. And again, this is a business. So they have to make money, because if you're not making money or that's not your business model, then you're a charity, right?
Mhm.
So the consolidation of these things, of television stations, of newspapers have like poof, local news has just disappeared, just collapsed. Um, so that's really, really concerning to me. But what you just mentioned about having jocks in different markets and voicing over and doing the ins and outs and all that stuff for Dallas, but you're living in Miami, we're seeing that same thing in other elements and aspects of the television station. For example, WFAA in Dallas just recently. So that's owned by Tegna. Back when I worked there, it was owned by Belo, but is owned by Tegna, and Tegna owns, I don't know, however many stations they have, but they now got rid of all the stations. They got rid of all of their promotions guys, right? Except one.
Wow.
One guy in Dallas is going to do the promotions, writing, putting together campaigns, all of this stuff for all the stations in the group, or however many stations, as opposed to, having him just take care of the Dallas market.
Right.
That's the kind of consolidation that technology enables, but also I believe hinders their real reach. And it may save their bottom line, but what does it do in terms of community? Like, are you still a part of the community if the guy in Dallas is writing about your breast cancer run in Cincinnati?
Mhm.
You know?
Right. And I want to talk about real quickly how when Eddie Murphy went from SNL, 48 Hours, put out the string of movies that he put out, it was all under the Paramount banner. He was one of the last movie stars to be under that old movie system where you
Wow.
were entitled to one studio. And I think if you wanted to shoot for, let's say, Universal, you had to go to Paramount. But hey, can we borrow Eddie? And when I think about him, Keenan Ivory Wayans, Robert Townsend with Hollywood Shuffle, and
Yeah.
how they pretty much changed the game. And of course, Keenan with A Living Color, it was really one of the shows that really, along with The Simpsons and Married with Children, put Fox on the map, gave
Right.
us all the superstars. Y'all know them. I ain't gonna say them. And then ended up giving us the modern day Super Bowl halftime show because they ran a counter Super Bowl halftime show, had a timer now during the broadcast to let you know. Flip back to the other network, watch the game. We're gonna steal their audience, put it on us. And then the next year, they ended up getting the King of Pop.
I did not know that. I did not know that. That is crazy. You know, talking about technology. So I just told you that I had created this whole course and I did everything myself and I shot it here. I have in this little space, I have a couple of different angles that I can use. I could use this area as a backdrop. I have a monitor over here that I can use. But the other crazy thing is, like, I have an actual switcher. So I could set up multiple cameras, me, myself,
Mhm.
and switch between camera angles if I wanted to. Could do it live, could do it taped, could do it. It's just there's so much out there, and all you have to really do is sort of, and everybody's done a video on it. Like, just go to YouTube and search, however, how to switch live or whatever. I'm sure there's somebody who's done a video on it. But that is where we're going. You mentioned something earlier when we were talking about fact checking, and that really is troubling because there isn't one of the things that I believe has been our downfall as a society is it's like we can't rely on a set of facts that is called the truth.
Mhm.
Everybody's as what's her name from the first what's his name administration said alternative facts. Remember, she said, "Oh, it's the alternative facts or whatever," and that's where we are right now. So you've seen what's happening on cable with Fox and MSNBC that's all happening online as well on just on a different scale. So if you're a conservative viewer, where are you watching? You're not watching MSNBC, you're watching Fox. But if you lean more liberally and what have you, you're watching MSNBC. That same thing is happening with podcasts. The podcasts I listen to are, I listen to the Bulwark and I listen to the Midas Touch Network, that are all, liberal leaning networks. And so that's where I feel like the disconnect where we are as a society, and why when you have one side that is okay with actually telling easily disproven things, presenting those as facts, and then telling their viewers that those are facts. And then what do we do? I mean, I'm not saying that the liberal leaning side is innocent either, but it does worry me because there isn't a Walter Cronkite to come in and be the arbiter of
Mhm.
of of the truth, if you
Yeah,
will.
it almost kind of reminds me of Good Morning Vietnam, where you had the two people in the studio getting the teletype and was reading out things that they didn't want the people to know. It almost feels we are at that
Mm-hmm.
point where we're reading out the
Yep.
teletype. We're only going to say what we want to say to our
Yep.
demos and
Yep.
not give the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And it's scary where people say, "Oh, I check the internet for my news. Where do you fetch it? What's that?" I'm
Yeah.
like, "What's next? We're not going to cite sources." I mean, some are probably doing that
Right.
now, but it's almost to where we're not making sure that the information is valid before we go relay it to the
Yep.
people, and people are taking it as gospel.
Yeah, you're right. People first of all, I think there's a dearth of critical thinking. We forgot that skill. Some never learned it, whatever, right? So
Mm,
whenever I see things that are online, the first thing I say, especially if it's like wild and crazy and possibly, I don't, it seems too good to be true or something. The first thing I do is I go to the source and I go to the about page. I want to find out who's behind this particular report, right? So once you in the this website was founded by, and they'll put, and then I put that name in and find out what's getting the 411 on whoever that person is. And that's just the beginning. Then if I see something, I'll be like, wait a minute, is that where, if it isn't reported by what I consider I shouldn't say traditional source, but a proven source that is proven to be impartial,
mhm,
like a Reuters or Associated Press. If I don't see that in there or more, or it's not being widely reported, or I can't find the original source. If I see a blog post and it's attributing another blog post that's attributing another sort of shady blog post, really, I'm going to be a
mhm.
little bit, yeah.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely scary times. I want to talk about the importance of NABJ and
Mm,
then also talk about how, startup networks like WB, UPN, when they were two former networks before merging to CW, and
mhm.
how they pretty much built the network off of black sitcoms. And then they did the bait and switch where we're going to dump the black and we're going to put in this to appeal to the mainstream demo. And also, I was a student member of NABJ, by the way.
I love it. I love it. I'm a lifetime member. Um, so the CW and what was the other one you said? Paramount? Not
Yeah,
Paramount.
it was
Oh,
back when
UPN.
it was UPN and WB and how they built off of black
Right.
sitcoms and then transitioned to
Right.
put Dawson's Creek and all the other stuff.
Right. Yeah, you're so much more knowledgeable about this than I am. I come from the news background, but I did have sort of a cursory understanding of what was going on there. But it's 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 one of the reasons that I'm glad we are doing our own thing. It's one of the reasons I'm glad to see you out here doing your own thing and what I plan to do and so on because for a long time I feel like our voices and our dollars and our attention was just really taken for granted. So they would put on, like these shows that they would run were syndicated program. I don't know what they paid for them, but the syndicated program, and then they would just run, get the ad revenue for that. It just really made me think about, and then when they start getting some traction, like you said, the old bait and switch. So now the demo is changing, and now they're like, okay, who do we need to go after, and who do we need to program for? Um, and so I find that interesting and somewhat disheartening because Black culture has always been the thing that everybody else followed. Look at when you look at trends, where do trends start? Black culture. We are the ones starting movements and and then they are being co-opted or taken by other groups. And so I love this idea of building our own and keeping our own. So yeah, fascinating.
Kind of reminds me of with video music box was still going on in the tri-state area. How Ralph McDaniel said he pitched that to MTV, they passed, and then they later created Yo MTV Raps, and then BT ended up putting together Rap City. Once it's okay, rap is taking off. We're
Yeah.
gonna take some of the stylings and forms from these regional local video shows
Hmm.
but give it a little bit more of a mainstream wash. More so on the
Yep.
MTV side because Rap City, they played rap acts that I know probably for sure wouldn't be on either the weekend version with Fat Five Freddy or the daily version with Ed Lover and Dr. Dre. So it's still through the lens of somebody that was in a suit and tie
Yeah.
sitting in a corporate office says,
Right.
what does little Johnny like? Oh, little
Exactly.
Johnny likes MC Hammer. Little Johnny likes Public Enemy. Little Johnny
Yep.
likes Beastie Boys.
Hmm.
How are we gonna put it on the TV, but make it friendly enough
Yep.
for advertisers
Yep.
and for mommy and daddy to say, it's okay, Billy. You can wear your
Hmm.
Public Enemy shirt to school because I know that you're not going to want to be like that when it comes time to go do your interview for admissions at Harvard. You get to do black cosplay.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of that got changed when again these decisions are driven by money.
Mhm.
So when they found out that there was an untapped market need for music, like the rap music, right? They were like, oh, wait a minute, there's this whole thing out here that we don't even know about, so let us look into it and find out how we can co-opt it and make money from it. So it's not like anybody came along and was saying, as a service to our community, let's present these various forms of music. It wasn't that at all. It was like, hey, listen, if we can pad out our bottom line, let's do it. And this is how we do it.
Mhm.
The problem though is that no one in, like you just mentioned, the C-suite, Like there weren't people who look like you and me in a lot of those corner offices. And so they weren't able to look at acts and relate to them. They couldn't relate to um, Curtis Blow and NWA and all of that stuff. They just it just sound like noise to them. But we know what that was. That was the music of what was happening in those were the early storytelling in our communities. And so when they finally got that and picked that up, then it was like, okay, now how can we make money from this?
Just like
Typical.
just like Jizza said in Protect Your Net. Who's your A&R? A mountain climber, some dude playing electric guitar. Once again, is someone that doesn't live the life but sees it can bring an impact
Yes.
to the bottom line,
Yeah.
and you got to give it to them. Smart business, because back during that time, I remember when certain artists they would do two separate video versions of
Yep.
songs, where one would be for BET and then one would be for MTV. One example, New Kids on the Block. They did a version of Please Don't Go Girl that only was seen on BET or other regional music video outlets because they were marketed as an R&B group. They were signed to the R&B division at Columbia,
Mm.
discovered by Maurice Starr, who discovered a New Edition, and how he said, I
Wow.
can take what I did with New Edition, put it on this, when we weren't even looking for the pop market at all. It happened where it was a pop station out of Florida played Please Don't Go Girl by accident, and they were about to get dropped by Columbia. And then the station called Columbia and said, hey, you guys got any more on them? And then that's when other stations started adding them.
Oh
And then
wow, I
that's
didn't know
when
that.
the pop dollars started rolling in. And Columbia say,
Mhm.
forget this marketing R&B.
Yep.
Y'all are a pop group. Even though y'all are R&B to
Wow.
the core, we're going to market you pop, 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 pop.
Wow. Wow. And this even goes back to my gosh, when the early days of Motown and these artists who actually were the ones doing the singing, but when you would see the and I'm not saying this happened on Motown, but back in the day, so they would be recording the songs, but when you actually saw what was pushed to the public, you'd be like four white guys in tuxedos.
Mm-hmm.
So this is nothing new. This has been the story of our lives.
Yeah, almost like the scene in the Five Heartbeats where they got the
Mm.
album cover of their album. Their faces
Yes.
weren't on it, and they were saying, "How come they ain't never crossed over to us? They want us changing our sound and look to appeal to them. How come I ain't never seen Five Brothers on the Elvis Presley album cover?"
Wow. Wow. You making me want to go back. Now I got to go back and watch that. And I have to go back and watch Network.
Yeah, and it's funny how you mentioned how it's all about catering to who your demo is. And I think about in Living Color how Keenan and Ivory Wayans, it was unapologetically black,
Yep.
unapologetically hip hop, and how it was definitely more flavor than SNL.
Mm.
And it gave so many people their starts, from Jim Carrey to Jamie Foxx to J Lo
Yep.
to all of the Wayne's family. Kim Coles was on there for season one,
Mm.
and to just go on and on about how that show I felt should still be on the air to this day, like a
Mm.
SNL that's currently celebrating their 50th. In
Yeah.
Living Color should be held in that same regard.
It it's too bad that somebody doesn't do that show again, but for say YouTube. Because I just don't think that television is, look at SNL. SNL has its audience, but I bet you I haven't looked into their numbers, but I bet their demo is really old. And by
It's
really old, I mean like 50 plus,
folks that
right?
grew up on it.
Exactly. And so then like they're not getting new viewership. The the question for like in Living Color is I wouldn't put that on air. I would put it on YouTube or something, their own network or something, but in a way that was sort of streaming based as opposed to you have to watch this on television. Although nowadays everything you can see, online. But that's what I would do if
Yeah,
I had to
it
do it
was
again.
pretty much where You can't do that on television, which was one of Nickelodeon's first big hits,
Yeah.
which, for those that don't know, was a Canadian import. It aired on YTV and it gave a little singer by the name of Alanis Morissette her
Oh,
start.
wow. I didn't know that either. I think I knew she was Canadian, but wow. Yeah,
Yeah, because
totally
her
agree.
first two albums were pretty much kind of like in the Paul Abdul poppy range, but when she did Jagged Little Pill, that was all she wrote, and she was off to the races. And it's smart for
Wow.
networks that's starting out, but hey, we ain't got no money for original
Yeah.
content. What can we do?
Yep.
Let's call up these foreign companies, but hey,
Yep.
what you got? We're desperate for programming. Bring
Hmm.
it on. Bring it on,
Hmm.
because like a lot of like early Nick Jr. shows that I would watch as a kid, a lot of them were like imports from other countries, because they would have like the dubbing from
Yeah.
various countries into English. And Power Rangers was
Wow.
big phenomenon in Japan, got Americanized, and it became the huge worldwide phenomenon that it
Yep.
still is to this day. I mean, it had my little 8-year-old self in the chokehold along with Ninja Turtles, but who's counting? But it just goes to show that it's good product, and if you can tailor it,
Yep.
market it right,
Yep.
then it will be a big hit, because they tried to pilot what was originally became Power Rangers maybe about 2 or 3 years prior to it taking off in '93. And
Mm.
one of the actors that was in the original pilot was Miguel A. Nunez Jr., who was in Sparks, who was in Joanna Man, and like
Wow.
me, a North Carolina native. He's from Wilson, North Carolina.
Oh, wow. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, so one more thing before we go. So talk about the current projects that you got coming. How can people sign up for the class, and where can they get more about Miss
I
Renee
love it.
Syler?
Well, okay. So again, my new I guess venture is teaching people how to get publicity for their their public to get publicity for their brand, for their service, their product, their event, and teaching them specifically how to do that through television. Again, we've been talking about local television for so long, but I believe that with the collapse of the network news, that people in local news areas of dominant influence, local markets, really do still trust their anchors more than they do network anchors. So I'm trying to teach people how to get on with their local anchors to get the publicity for their event, or as I was saying, product service or what have you. So I have this, my website is pitchperfectacademy.tv, not com, pitchperfectacademy.tv. And I'm dropping this course at the end of next month that'll teach people exactly step by step. Here's how you do it. Here's how you pitch. Here's who you pitch to. Here's how you practice. There's various types of interviews. Here's how you practice and get ready for each one of these. And then what the studio environment is like. And so that I still do a lot of public speaking. I do personal one-on-one media coaching. People are nowadays, we're doing more Zoom calls. We're doing more, people are doing events where they need to know how to read a teleprompter. Everybody thinks, oh, reading a teleprompter is easy. No, it's not. But you can do it. You need to know how to practice. So yeah, those are the things that I'm working on now. So all about just really taking my 30 years of skill and teaching people, passing along that information so that people can build their own brands.
And also, if you act now, she'll throw in the clip where she was on Walker, Texas Ranger. Yeah, you ain't think I was gonna bring that up, did you? Well, I did. She
Do
was
you
on
know,
Walker, Texas Ranger.
and do you know, okay, so I was back in Dallas and
Mhm.
that show was filmed in the Dallas area. I did 2 episodes, I believe, of that show. One, I was a reporter. It was called White Buffalo. And I was a reporter in the field doing a stand up. And the other was I was just doing something from, like, I was supposed to be in a news studio. So I was being an anchor. Do you know that was probably 80? What do you think? 80. So no, I'm sorry. That was probably
Maybe
99.
93,
No,
99.
maybe 99, I think. Do you
Okay.
know I am still getting residual checks from those? Now, they are like 25 cents, but I'm still getting
I mean,
residuals.
25 cents go a long way. I mean, it could probably give you a biscuit or something at Wim's Chicken. It definitely won't get you none of that sweet Georgia Browns, but it's some money is better than nothing. So
Yeah.
Renee, any shout outs you want to give before we conclude your interview?
I just want to say thank you to all of you guys who have stayed and watched this interview. This has been quite enjoyable, Jarrell. Your knowledge and information has been so much fun taking this trip down memory lane with you. And I would just say to those of you who have been watching us and figuring, oh, I want to do this, I want to do my own thing. Listen, do it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. There are so many avenues out there and ways for you to carve your own path. So get busy.
Yep, and you can watch this interview on the official YouTube channel at youtube.com. So that's Beyond the Album Cover, and listen to it on all DSPs. It is for free because I'm all about being for the people, and I am trying to be like those great broadcasters who I grew up listening to and watching, like Miriam Thomas, Larry Starner on WTVD channel, Charlie Gaddy on WRAL. Shout out to my boy Chris Lee, who's doing this thing at WRAL. Everybody in the news media space or media in general, whether it be radio, podcasts, whatever you do, make sure you do it with truth. Make sure you do it with love. And in the words of the late Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck. Renee, thank you for coming on Beyond the Album Cover, and you're welcome to come back anytime.
Thanks, Jarrell. Thank you so much.